this UC2 panel talking about the issues surrounding aging. I'm Abe Schwab. I'm the co-director of the gerontology program here at IPFW, and I work with one of our panelists a lot with the Northeast Indiana Coalition for Advanced Care Planning. So I spend a lot of time in my at least community service dealing with questions of aging. So Steve asked me to be moderator. But I'm largely here just to facilitate the conversation from the people we have here on the panel. So let me briefly introduce them. First, we have Susie Rumsey. She's an associate professor of English and linguistics. She teaches composition, professional and technical writing, and family history research and writing. Her research interests are focused on heritage and cultural literacy studies, that is, how people read, write, and make meaning in a variety of locations, cultures, and traditions, older adult literacy practices, faith-based, intergenerational, and community-focused literacies, and service learning. Her earlier work focused on a study of 5 generations of her own family and their Amish heritage. Her most recent work, Holding On to Literacies, Older Adult Narratives of Literacy and Aging, is coming out in Age, Culture, and Humanities in the next month. It's Susie Rumsey. Then we have Nyla Reimer. To the right page. Dr. Nyla Reimer is currently the director of the graduate nursing programs at IPFW. She has been a full-time faculty member in the nursing program for 12 years. She earned her Master's of Science degree from IPFW and her PhD from Indiana University School of Nursing, where her research targeted care of residents who reside in the long-term sections of nursing homes. In addition to her focus on exercise programs in nursing homes, her most recent research captured things that mattered most to residents while living in long-term care sections of nursing homes. Dr. Reimer has been a nurse for 25 years with various nursing experiences in care of elderly persons in nursing home and acute care settings. Expounding on her passion for care of elderly persons, Dr. Reimer has experience in developing and teaching an online interdisciplinary healthcare gerontology course, in addition to leading faculty assessment and integration of gerontological and geriatric concepts in nursing education. Then next we have Keith Huffman. Keith Huffman was born in Toledo, Ohio on July 20, 1951. He received his undergraduate education from Adrian College and his legal education from Indiana University and was admitted to the bar in 1980. Mr. Huffman is a member of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys and served as the president of the Indiana chapter of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. He is a past chairperson for the Elder Law section of the Indiana Bar Association. Mr. Huffman is a member of the Ethics Committee at Bluffton Regional Medical Center, chairperson of the Aging and In-Home Services Board of Directors, and a member of the Fort Wayne Lutheran Hospital Institutional Review Board. Keith Huffman was named the Citizen of the Year by the Wells County Chamber in 2003 and was named an outstanding member of the Indiana National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys in 2009. He was named the Powley Award winner for 2016. This national award is given to a National Academy of Elder Law member who has demonstrated a commitment to promote in the minds of the general public a general understanding of the rights and needs of the elderly and disabled. Next we have Dr. Beth Caskell. She's been a professional practice nurse specializing in the care of older adults for over 20 years. She completed her undergraduate studies in behavioral biology at Marietta College, Ohio, and her graduate studies at Case Western Reserve University. She completed a National Institute of Mental Health postdoctoral fellowship at Case Western, studying the differences in caregiver stress and strain among different ethnic groups. She teaches a variety of courses within the Department of Nursing, including psychiatric mental health nursing and a gerontology course for the College of Health and Human Services. Dr. Caskell's current geriatric research interests include echolalia, very good, and the use of electroconvulsive therapy in older adults with middle and late stage dementia. And then finally we have Elliot Blumenthal, who started his service at IPFW in 1989 and is an associate professor in the biology department and currently serves as acting chair of the biology department. One of the early members of the gerontology committee at IPFW, he was involved in designing the gerontology certificate that is currently offered. He teaches a biology of aging class for non-biology majors that is an elective class for the gerontology certificate. He performs research on how the immune response changes with age, looking at how holistic approaches the use of plants and plant products, can affect the immune response during aging. The purpose of this research is not to stop aging, but to figure out how to delay some changes in immune response so that aging individuals can respond better to pathogenic antigens and have a better quality of life. In addition, he studies whether these plant extracts affect tumor cells and determine if they can slow tumor cell growth. So as you can see, this is a well-credentialed and impressive panel that we've got here to talk about issues related to aging. And I'm just going to start, should we start here or should we start there? With a simple question to introduce yourselves to the audience, which is what drew you to work in the area of aging? What drew you to work on the areas of aging?
I'm going to let Elliot go first.
I guess mine was somewhat serendipitous in terms of the research that I was involved in. I was doing some lung cancer research as a postdoc in Colorado, and in looking at the lung cancer, we got some young and old mice, and I was looking, my background, I guess, was immunology, and I did some biochemical things for my postdoc fellowship. And so I was looking at lung cancers and looking at some of the biochemical changes that occur with the cancers in the lungs, looking at old and young mice, and I started to find some very big differences in some of the biochemical pathways in these mice between old and young mice, and that got me interested more in the aging process. And since then I've been going deeper into some of the immunological aspects of why the immune response changes, and can anybody guess maybe when the immune response starts to go downhill? I'm going to ask the audience because I'm a teacher and I have to ask questions. So.
Retirement.
It actually starts just after puberty. So I tell my classes that I have not reached puberty yet, so I'm not aging yet, but it does start going downhill in the 20s. It certainly doesn't affect you until later on, generally after 60, 70, but it does start going downhill fairly shortly after that. And I do use in my research mouse volunteers rather than human volunteers for studying this aspect of it.
And how do you ensure informed consent in those cases?
I have NIH approval.
Well, my story couldn't be any more different from Elliot. What drew me to loving and being passionate about working with older adults was I was a latchkey kid. And so my grandma, Teresa Pullman, raised me the majority, for really about as long as I can remember. And I used to go to, the quilting, which I'm not a quilter, but I would sit there and be compliant with her and the other church ladies. I can remember going to the pinochle, euchre, and hearts parties that they would have, and I would sit there and either eat mince by her side and just watch everything. And I loved older adults, and still to this day, some people will say to me, gosh, Beth, the majority of your friends are a lot older than you. They're not necessarily your contemporaries. Well, that's how it started for me. It was, they talk about how everybody has a gift, or everybody knows where they're meant to be. I just knew it. So that's my story.
You're sticking to it.
I'm sticking to it.
I might just say we have Lori Stock here from the Alzheimer's Association. We also have Linda Dunno from AARP, so we've got some experts out in the audience as well. I got started really working with the elderly through doing estate planning. And it used to be that estate planning was doing your will and doing your trust. And then more and more folks started going to the nursing home. And now it's really expensive to go to the nursing home. And how are we going to pay for that? So we got into helping people with that part of it. And then it got to the point where Congress was going to change a lot of the laws and make it really bad for folks that were getting elderly, that had Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or MS. So we got together with groups of lawyers and formed some associations around the state and around the country to really advocate for seniors. One of the things that Abe and I have been working on a lot lately is advanced care planning. We don't do a very good job about communicating. It's kind of like the audience here today. Unless you're in the moment, you don't pay any attention to aging, So we got into it that way. And I tell my clients, the older you are, the older old is. So it's something you just don't think about until you get, address it. So we have a lot of opportunity to help people, and that's very rewarding.
Well, I really become to appreciate older persons during my world of nursing. And I was an acute care nurse for many years and always enjoyed older persons in the ICU. And I often wondered, I wonder what it's like for them on the other side of the healthcare spectrum. Many of them came from long-term care facilities, and believe it or not, in my nursing education, I had never worked in a nursing home or any type of a long-term care facility. And I just had this wonderment about that. And so I went ahead and worked on my master's degree and really changed from this acute care mode of ICU, where I had worked and enjoyed my nursing career, to long-term care. And I became interested in older persons, and I sat and I talked and I listened to their stories, and I learned so much and developed an exercise program with them in nursing homes. And then I moved on with my education, and for my dissertation, I was interested in what was important to residents from their own perspectives. I think so many times, especially as healthcare givers, we think that we know what our residents and elderly people want and what they need. But indeed, sometimes we fail to get that from their own perspectives. And so I went ahead with my research in that area, and it was absolutely phenomenal. So I've grown to just appreciate more and more older persons through my work, and I have older parents, and I continue to learn from them every day.
Well, my story of becoming more interested in understanding the way that older adults think and write, specifically since that's my field, actually didn't. It started somewhat like Beth. I grew up in a multi-generational family. I had a grandmother and a great-grandmother. And then when I hit graduate school, I had 5 living generations in my family. And I was a first-generation scholar, and there I was at grad school, and I was trying to make sense of this big world of academics. And so there was always a sense of wanting to connect what I was learning at school with home, and valuing home and family in the academic world in a way that oftentimes it's not. And so it sort of was a natural progression that my own family then would become a central part of my dissertation. And so I ended up doing a study that involved 4 of the 5 living generations of my family at the time, as well as the surrounding Amish community. My great-grandmother was Amish and raised my grandmother Amish, about the first third of her life. And in order to look at literacies and technologies across generations, like how do we pass knowledge and reading and writing habits between generations. So my great-grandmother, I called her Grandma Great, lived until she was 97, and it was 2011 that she passed. And so once I finished the dissertation and got the job here at IPFW, I really wanted to find a way of taking my research and helping students along the same path and to enjoy the same things that I do, which is typical, I think, of all of us. And so I tried to think of ways to connect home and intergenerational communication patterns and that kind of thing. And so I started doing service learning courses. The first one was with a local history organization, and the 2 people who were part of the organization were older. But more significantly, the second service learning course I did, I had students writing family histories or memoirs with hospice patients and or their families. Some of us weren't able to connect with actual hospice patients just because of the timing, you understand. So I and a couple other students ended up just working in a nursing home and connecting with them, writing down their stories, asking them questions about when they were young, those sorts of things, and then gifting back to them sort of a handmade item that had their story. And so from then, I started to dig in deeper, and I really wanted to know more about what kinds of things happen to older adults when they're no longer in the workforce, for example, because literacy is so often tied to what we do for a living, right? And so I ended up doing a study, and that's the one that's just now coming out, which it's supposed to be out last fall, but it's now January and almost February, and it's still not out, so who knows. And what I did is I interviewed, I worked with Aging and In-Home Services, and they found me participants who wanted to be interviewed, and I drove to 9 different counties and interviewed, I can't remember how many people, about how they read and write every day, and got some really cool answers, and that's kind of how the story goes. And now the article's almost coming out, and I'm presenting on the material later this semester, and I'm looking forward to my next adventure. So.
Thank you. What is, from each of your perspectives, what's a common misperception about aging?
That aging is always bad.
Right.
That your body is just going to get worse and worse. And I teach the biology of aging class. It's amazing to me how these young kids think that they're invincible, and it's much too early to think about the aging process. But aging isn't all bad. I think that I'm a better person now than I was when I was younger. My body doesn't always work as well. I need eyeglasses to see. Sometimes I can't hear. I'm becoming more prosthetic and bionic as the years go by as well. But it's fun for me to be old and yet still go out and beat some of these young athletes that are out there on the racquetball court. Or I was playing tennis this last summer in the intramurals, playing against this young 20-something-year-old kid, and he couldn't believe that this old man was beating him. And I think it's fun. I enjoy becoming older, and I think there's a misperception that aging is not always good.
I'll second that there are pleasures of being a little bit older in athletic success. A couple of weeks ago, I beat 3 early 20-year-olds in a game of 21 on the basketball court, which is every person for themselves. And there's a certain kind of pride that I got from that I could not have gotten at a younger age. Others?
Well, I'll share too, because I asked this exact question to have asked this question of students over many years in teaching and in clinical practice, and these are the number 2 things that I hear. That all older adults wear outdated, frumpy clothes, and that older adults lack resilience. And we talk about those misperceptions, at length, but, over the years, those are pretty common themes that I've heard. And what I want to say is I wish you could meet my 87-year-old mother, who's probably outdresses the majority of us in this room in terms of being, hip and trendy. And the concept of resilience has been studied quite a bit in not only the nursing literature and the social science literature and some of the other disciplines. Older adults are by far more resilient than any other age cohort. Really, when you look at the environmental challenges they have to overcome, the social challenges they have to overcome. So. Frumpy clothes and resilience.
I was just going to ask what you meant by resilience, and I understand that that's a common topic within nursing, but I'm also thinking about it in terms of sort of the misconception that I was thinking about, of course, since my field is literacy studies, are the misconceptions about the literacy abilities of older adults. And literacy is one of those things that it tends to be used to set people apart, make some better than others, to create stereotypes. So what used to be counted as literacy, even 50 years ago, is almost obsolete in terms of what people consider literacy today. And the problem with that is that all of those literacies build on one another, and you can't have one without the other, right? And so if you do a search, just a plain old Google search of older adult literacies, almost, I would say 95% of it that comes up is going to be about medical literacy, because that seems to be the predominant issue, that they want older adults to be able to read and write this complicated medical stuff because older people are always sick. And I mean, while it's true that bodies start to fail, the kinds of practices that get put into place in order to somehow make documents more readable for older adults, actually, studies show time and time again that they don't actually work. So like the reading scale, telling somebody they have a 9th grade reading level, that sort of thing, actually isn't valid. The length of words doesn't really matter. And what it means instead is that we need to contextualize things differently. And the other thing is just assuming that older adults can't adapt, right? Mm-hmm. That they can't, that they're not willing to listen, or that they're so stubborn somehow that they are unwilling to hear what a doctor has to say. I think it's more the other side of things, unwilling to slow down a little bit and explain it, rather than the older adults themselves.
I actually have some clients that would not be true.
Well, I'm sure there's some that are stubborn.
I was listening to a PBS show yesterday, and they were talking about end-of-life issues, and they were talking about CPR. Yeah. And the doctor said they were operating under this woman, and they were trying to do CPR, and they'd done it for an hour and a half. And they've been told how to start it, how to do it, but they hadn't been told how to quit. And so we were doing this on a 65-year-old woman who is relatively young for our practice. And those are the words that really struck me, because we're seeing people age and age and age, right. And yet those people are still cognitive. They still know what they're doing. They're still, they have family structure, because we have a lot of family support around this area. You mentioned aging in home services. It's like the best kept secret in North Indiana. Yes. We have taken, and we are the first area agency throughout the United States that we've actually done a medical model where we've actually partnered with Anthem and with PHP to do services as we morph more into a health organization. We did the 30-day readmission things where we saved about $7 million in the course of 2 years for Medicare. There's a lot of things that are going on. We serve about 56,000 people in northeastern Indiana every year. So there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of support for seniors. And as people get older, they're going to need that. The other thing I'm struck about is the financial myths that seniors believe. Yes. I mean, we don't have any estate tax in Indiana unless you have more than $11 million for a married couple. We don't have any inheritance tax anymore. When someone goes to a nursing home or they need waiver services, Indiana now has a plan to help age in place. And so historically, we've spent about $3 billion a year as a state on people for the aged and disabled, and about $2 billion has been spent on institutional care, and about $1 billion has been spent on services at home, so people didn't have to go to a facility. And Indiana has a plan by the age 2020 to rebalance that to 50-50. So there's now a lot more services that allow people to stay at home instead of having to go to a facility. And all that is, I think, great progress. Mm-hmm. And our division of aging has really come a long way towards, let's think about what's best for all Hoosiers, as opposed to just simply, let's say how we can deny services.
Another myth that I can think of is pain. I think that it's very much kind of accepted that as we get older, we should have pain. And pain is not a normal experience of aging. And when I worked in the nursing home, I remember we always assessed our residents for pain every shift. That was the nurse's job. And coming up on one of the residents' rooms, I went into her room and I said, "Are you having any pain today?" And she said, "Oh, not more than normal. No, I'm doing fine." And so looking at her medication record where we indicated their pain level were zeros, which 0 means no pain. And so there were zeros across, all the way across. And I said, "Well, I see that we have you down for not ever having any pain." And she said, "Oh, I've got arthritis. Of course I have pain. I have pain all the time." And I said, "Well, tell me more about that pain. What's that like?" "Well, it just hurts all over, mostly in my hands." And I said, "Well, on a scale of 0 to 10, where would you say your pain is at that's normal for you?" And she said, "Oh, about a 4 all the time." So here she's been living with this arthritic pain that we had no record of, not being treated for. And I do think it's just kind of a perception that we have so much pain that even older persons themselves just accept it that way and live with it, when indeed maybe we could help with that. So we just need to assess more appropriately for our patients.
I actually thought of another myth. The myth that older adults and technology don't mix. There's a distinct age bias when it comes to technology, and especially the newer the technology, the more likely it is that grandma doesn't use it. Right, there used to be the joke about mom's on Facebook now, and now it's grandma's on Facebook. And you know, the younger crowd doesn't understand that their parents actually grew up with technology, so it's becoming more and more prevalent. But beyond that, there are equal numbers of older adults that I've spoken with and worked with that either want to have nothing to do with any of it. They're content with their lives, and good for them. And then there's the other half that has this sort of innate desire to learn and eagerness to try out things. And some of them are infinitely surprised when I say, well, you know, like an iPad can really help with your reading because you can enlarge the print and it's so light. You don't have to carry heavy books around. And, you know, there's advancements in technologies for literacy in particular that a lot of them don't think about because they're not brave enough. But then there's also this assumption that all of them aren't brave enough, and it's just not the case.
Personally, I still don't understand Snapchat, so
I don't either.
I was like, well, I should be hip. I'll download it to my phone, and I downloaded it to my phone.
No,
I got
let
on
go,
it,
man.
and was
Let it
like,
go.
I was like, oh, no, this is too much.
You would be what's called a digital dinosaur. You need to talk to a digital native to help you.
Yeah, my son's 11. He's almost
He's
to
right
the point
there,
where he
yeah.
can train me. How has aging changed over the last? You hinted at this a little bit in terms of the funding for aging, right, Keith, in your answer. But what have been the most significant changes in the aging process, or how people age, or how we understand age over the last decade or so?
At least in my area, I guess some of the biggest things involves the technology, gene sequencing and things like that. They're actually trying to isolate the genes that cause aging.
No kidding.
And once they can do that, then they can understand what the aging process is, the aging proteins and things like that. I think with the technology and advances in drugs for Alzheimer's, we're trying to understand that. And there will be, I don't know if there will be a cure. I hope that there is, but there certainly will be ways to treat it better so that it may not impact your life as much as it seems to at this point. And the advances in science are incredible with things like that. And that's just going to be rolling up downhill soon, that they're going to come up with all kinds of ways to beat many types of diseases, memory responses, cancer, the aging gene, whatever that is, to obviously not end the aging process, but at least to have a good quality of life while you age. And I think those are the biggest strides that we're making in science anyway.
Yeah, I've seen that in action. My father-in-law, he's only 72, so he's not old, but he's survived cancer and he has Parkinson's. And the thing that's been interesting about being his daughter and watching how Parkinson's changes a body over time, it's hard, right? And I've been so thankful for the medications that are available, and I've been so angry at them at the same time. But I know that he opted to have a surgery that, I forget the name of it, but essentially there is like a pacemaker in his brain.
Deep brain stimulation.
That's what I was going to say. Thank you. And by opting to do that, it I think extended his life significantly. And he's at Disney World right now, and I keep getting pictures from my mother-in-law. She took her first selfie, by the way, this weekend. It was awesome. So anyway, yeah.
I wrote that down. That was my number one. Yeah, advances not only in genetics and genomics and pharmacogenetics and genomics definitely will be the future. And, advanced newer technologies like this DBS or deep brain stimulation. We're going to see, I think, more and more of that. I do work around the use of an old technology, but we're much better with it, called electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT. And there's a lot of research right now about the efficacy of that form of treatment for individuals at various stages of dementia. And that technology is also going to be advanced. And and you might be saying, well, how can the ECT help? What we're finding for the short term with regard to middle stage and late stage dementias, ECT is helping quite a bit with certainly aggressive behaviors and unpredictable based behaviors. And then the last technological advancement that continues to just stun and amaze me are all the advances in the neuroimaging. So we can see not only structurally but functionally what's going on, in the brain and in the brain stem, and the better we can image that, then that will help drive our our treatments. It's going to drive probably the future of where medication is going as well.
You can't diagnose Alzheimer's without a brain biopsy, and the only way to do that is on a dead person. So with the imaging technology, you can see the changes earlier on. You can see how therapies are affecting it, whether it's beneficial or not, and that's going to be a very big advance.
The Japanese actually have an older population than what we do.
Yes,
And they are working on developing robots that help people transfer from the bed to the toilet and back. That's the leading reason why people go to nursing homes. I don't know, have you ever heard of Calico? This is the California Life Company. This is Google taking on death, all right? So they're putting $100 million a year into a moonshot. And their first thing they came up with was a contact lens that would turn green internally if your sugar was off.
No
They're
kidding.
taking on diabetes. And they're coming up with all kinds of different things, and their mission is to extend human life. They brought in some really big hitters to run the company. Arthur Levinson's the chairman of the board. So it's a really outstanding and astonishing thing they're doing.
Yeah.
The diagnostics just continue to expand. It's just incredible. And I'm thinking too about how care of older persons have changed and how our focus on centering on the person. It's so important when we look across any of our populations and how we care for our patients. But for elderly persons, for example, in nursing homes, we need to be looking at, their autonomy and being able to develop what we call authentic presence. It's more than being present with them. It's having that ability to kind of reach into whatever it is that they're trying to experience. Although we can't know what their experiences are, at least to get some idea that, to understand what it is that they want to know in order to live a successful, healthy life at the end of life. And so thankfully, we've come a long ways. Facilities have improved care dramatically. We have a ways to go yet, but at least we are looking at the person more and giving more independence and autonomy. So,
One of the big pushes in Indiana right now is we have adult protective services in Indiana. We have like 45 people who serve in that role for the entire state, and a third of them are part-time. And they aren't run centrally, they're run through certain prosecutors' offices, because when they started the program, 12 prosecutors got together on somebody's front porch and said, well, I'll take one, and I'll take one, I don't want one. So they're putting together a push to really promote adult protective services, to provide that safety net for seniors, to investigate when people are living in facilities or places they shouldn't be living in, when someone's abusing them. It's anticipated that legislatures are really going to increase the funding for that program, and they've centralized all of the different intake. So they now have common forms they use when they take somebody in, so they can tell where the problems are, what kind of common problems are, how do we address this as a state so that we can provide services to avoid these problems. So the state is actively pushing that kind of thing. And it's going to be a wonderful thing that's going to provide a lot more of a safety net for seniors.
That's cool. My take on this is, I guess I feel like a little bit of an outsider because I am still pretty young, right? And so the things that I'm noticing are that number one, the population is simply growing, right? The baby boomers are hitting retirement age, and there's that population bulge that's moving forward. And because of that, I think that the advancements that we're seeing in medicine and facilities and all those sorts of things are kind of, the need is there, and so we're going ahead and fixing those things or trying to find solutions to things because there's such a need.
Do you know what they call that?
Do tell.
Boutique care.
Boutique care. Very nice, thank you. The other thought I had when I was kind of thinking about this one is that, well, Elliot, you said at the beginning that old is always a little older than whatever you are, right? And I guess the thing that I've noticed is that, like 30's the new, 40's the new 30, 50's the new 40, 60's the new 50, and it seems like a lot of people are sort of embracing age more than they have before. It's cool to be an older person who's retired, who gets to hang out with their grandkids, who gets to volunteer, who gets to do whatever they want because they're retired, right? I've noticed too that the way that older adults are represented in advertisements has drastically changed. In some ways, they still are sort of younger and their teeth are extra shiny, right? And they've got this like wave hair. But other times you see actual older adults who, look like real human beings for a medication or what have you. And so I feel like, I know a lot of women who are letting their hair just go naturally gray, and I think gray is like the new popular color, even among young ones, which, that's weird. But I just feel like there's just sort of an acceptance, so it could be somewhat of just the population and the number of people who are growing older and saying, hey, we're still here and we're still viable human beings, pay attention. But it also could just be, maybe social media is making the difference, I don't know. But
I just want to say, too, that the societies that you look at that age well and that have longevity in them are generally societies that have extended families, or it's more of a communal type atmosphere.
Yep.
And the people stay active, they're engaged, the young people interact with the older people. And I think some of our elder care centers are becoming more that way as well, that they're trying to maintain the activity levels, that keep people active, to keep them interacting with other people, rather than just saying, okay, you're over 60 now, you go shuffle off someplace and don't bother us anymore.
These areas, instead of being a place to die, which many elderly residents will tell you that, I came to the nursing home to die, it's a place to die. So instead of looking at that focus, there needs to be more of a focus of a home-like environment and small pods, and they call them little greenhouse areas, where they actually live and nursing staff become, and they will call them their second family.
Right.
Because they develop these relationships that are very much similar to what they were used to when they were at home. Very important to healthy aging.
I saw some news story about, I think it's a facility for Alzheimer's patients, and they actually have like little tiny houses that are set up that looks like a boulevard almost, and I just thought that was the most clever thing, like taking that home-like atmosphere that all good nursing homes really try and foster, right? And like making it sort of a physical looking home. I just thought that was neat.
I'd like to bring up one point that I'm very passionate about, and we're kind of talking over it. Some of you may be more familiar with it, but because I'm a psychiatric mental health nurse, we have a huge problem in the United States with regard to the care that we're providing to our older adults that are aging in place with their primary psychiatric disorders. All of these care environments, a lot of these concepts that we're talking about are really
Best case scenario.
Best case scenario,
Boutique is what you
aging
called
in
them.
place, fairly well off people that are aging. We've got an ever-growing population of individuals that are aging with their psychopathology, meaning they're living longer and longer with their chronic schizophrenia. They're living longer and longer with their chronic bipolar disorder. Right. They're living longer and longer. And these individuals are definitely marginalized. You're not going to see them at the townhouse per se. They're going to be in different sorts of environments and different sorts of group homes. But I just wanted to put that out there, because that's definitely something that we as a people, that we as a nation need to become more aware of, and I feel like we need to do something more about that.
Well, mental disability is one of those things that also gets stigmatized, just like aging. And I feel like if an individual has a mental condition and they are aging, and perhaps their literacy is also, at a lower end of what we would consider literate today, right? Then they're sort of triply, stigmatized. And one of the goals of my research is really sort of to give voice to those who don't have a voice. And so I admit that those volunteers I've had in the past have been individuals who were willing to talk with me and were probably more lucid than others. But I do have a very strong interest also in mental health and how story and narrative and those sorts of sort of writing engagement can actually help stabilize certain types of struggles. So.
Absolutely.
One thing that I wanted to mention, and maybe you'll correct me if I should mention it, but about the way that aging has changed, and it builds off of some of the things that you've said about the aging population becoming larger, about people living longer, and then a little bit with what you talked about, Elliot, with the multi-generational or the family, is the stress that the increasing population of aging adults puts on the actual caregivers. And I've witnessed this a little bit firsthand. My mother-in-law first cared for her mother as her mother went through the phases of Alzheimer's, and now is caring for her mother-in-law. And so the lesson there for me was make sure you have a daughter, because her mother-in-law only has 2 sons. But the kind of stress that it puts on because of this shift in the population, this creates an additional area where problems can arise because of the reliance on family to do many of the things, right? I mean, if we're going to push towards aging in place within the state of Indiana, this is going to put even more stress on it. At least it's something that has become an area of more emphasis as a result of these shifts. But it's just one thing I wanted to mention. I don't know.
Actually, I'd hope that my next study would actually be of caregivers, because I watch my mother-in-law, who has her own health issues, has survived cancer, has osteoporosis, care for, my father-in-law, right? I see individuals who are sort of the sandwich generation, where they're caring for their children and sometimes their grandchildren and their aging parent, like my mother is in that situation. I have quite a bit of experience myself of being a caregiver. My husband and I have been through a lot of health issues. And I feel like that's one of the sort of forgotten groups in all of the mix. It's not to say that we should, I don't want to minimize the issue of the older adults themselves who are struggling through the things that they're struggling with. But for those that are the caregivers, it's a thankless job, and it usually goes unnoticed. And there's a heavy emotional burden as well as a physical one, and sometimes a financial one. I mean, you get the idea. And so that's why I'd like to hear their stories. And I've decided that that's sort of when I'm trying to find the stories of people who are sort of forgotten or left behind or not talked about, that's what came to mind as sort of the next study I'd like to do.
There was a major study that came out in October, and it was about caregiving in America. And they proposed some very, very specific steps to take to address caregiving in America. One of the provisions would allow caregivers who left the workforce because they had to care for a loved one to actually get credits under the Social Security system, so that they wouldn't be deprived of financial resources later on down the road. It would require states and HMS to actually come up with specific videos, programs. AARP helped pass the CARE Act in Indiana. And in Indiana, when someone's discharged from a hospital going home, there's supposed to be provisions for the caregiver where you give specific treatment. How do you care for this wound? How do you care for these things? So that the caregiver is more prepared, because we're we're doing this thing where we're getting people out of the hospital faster and faster and faster, which means people are going home sicker and sicker and sicker, which means the caregiver is doing a lot of things
More and
they
more of the
weren't
work.
trained to do.
Yep.
And so the idea here is we should develop specific programs where people can be trained to do that at home. There's a public partnership through the Medicaid program in a lot of different states. Massachusetts has 27,000 people being paid to care for someone at home so they don't have to go to an institution. We have about 400 people in Indiana. So other states have done a lot more than what we have done. We've been kind of slow to the table, but I think the Division of Aging is finally ready to do something. So if you read that study, it's a wonderful study. Just type Caregiving in America 2016, and you'll see it. They have a lot of very specific steps about what you could do to help people stay where they want to be and age in place.
Isn't it amazing how the pendulum has swung here in the United States? 100 years ago, we wouldn't even be having this conversation because, great-grandma, great-grandpa, grandma, grandpa, I mean, we all lived together, more communally. And, when you look at various caregiving models, all across the world, of course, you can track and see where, non-industrial countries became industrialized and then the family units fragmented. I mean, that's documented, all across the world. But there are still places. And does anybody here know about Geel, Belgium? Geel, G-E-E-L, Geel, Belgium. Geel, Belgium, since the 1500s, has probably had the best residential community model for aging in place. And here's the additional piece to it: aging in place for individuals that are living with mental illness in the world. So their concept is their entire community. Everybody in Geel is a part of helping the individual age in place. The individual can walk down, the main streetway, and they're having a hard time maybe deciding, to go into the store. They forgot how to get back. Everybody in that community takes responsibility to care for them. Everybody in the community has a place to live and will always have a place to live in a home, not a nursing home. They've done it. There were some researchers here in 1960, 1970 that went over to study the model, brought the model back here to the United States, but it was never
caught on.
Never fully embraced. And to me, it's just, the pendulum's over here, and I bet in another 50, 60 years, it might be back in the middle, and then maybe it'll be over here. But that's life, right? I mean, we could look at anything and see these pendulum shifts. But
there are some continuing care communities across the United States now, where the people who run the community take capitated payments. So they get their Medicare, their Medicaid, whatever other income they're going to get. But they're fully responsible for that patient's health and welfare, transportation to the doctor, transportation to the dentist. And the better, healthier they can keep them, the less cost they have to them, and the more money they make. And these are for-profit entities that are actually entering this place to see if they can't better manage the dollars.
Well, you touched on this too, but not only do we need to care for the elderly, but we need a lot of support for the people who care for the elderly. The trauma, the stress that we go through. My mother died at age 93, but for the last 3 years, she never had Alzheimer's, but she had dementia that was getting worse and worse. The stress on the kids, that she doesn't recognize us, she doesn't know where she is. She really ended up not being the person that we knew and loved. And we need support for that as well. How do we support them without support for us?
Right.
And we really need that support. And if they can give, whether it's Social Security credits or whatever, there needs to be something given back to them.
And one of their suggestions was paid FMLA. And family medical leave could be for parents or grandparents instead of just children or siblings and things like that. So if we expand that a little bit would go a long way.
I wonder too if there are, my mother-in-law could probably really benefit from a support group of some kind. And she's tech savvy enough that, you know, she emails and uses a computer for a variety of things, but I don't think she's really thought too far beyond, you know, the basics to be able to reach out into you know, the world to find those support groups. So I don't know, I mean, do such things exist? I mean, is that a common thing? I don't know.
They do exist right now.
Yeah.
They're caregiving support groups, but I do think it gets very complicated, and older persons tend to not want to impose, for
Right,
one thing.
right.
And I know with my own parents, they tend not to tell anything unless it gets to the point where it's so bad, whatever it is, that they have no other alternative. But many times I've seen older couples where the wife or the spouse ends up wearing themselves down as they're providing care
Right.
for their loved one. And the sandwich generation, it's extremely difficult. And when you think about the complexity of care now, and with all these wonderful diagnostics we have, that's more trips to the doctor. It's more trips to the radiology department to get an x-ray, or to the drugstore to get the medication. So it is a tremendous gap in where we need support. There's no doubt about it. I think where it's the children, the spouse, or whomever it falls on, there's definitely a gap right there.
So any questions from the audience for our distinguished panelists? We have a microphone as well, if anybody has any.
I don't think there's anything that's been talked about tonight that AARP hasn't hashed over the same thing. And one of the things that we're seeing is you've got 3 generations that are retired. And that's probably the first that that's happened. Because of the fact, just like with me, my dad's 92, I'm 68, I've got kids, and like you said, I had a handicapped grandson. That sandwich generation. The Caregiver Act, thanks you for mentioning that. We work hard trying to find some kind of support, but then you have an event, how do the people get away to come and attend it? That's the issue. It's like they don't have that support, so they get the break. We took surveys. We had a board that they could put sticky notes on and say, what is your biggest problem as a caregiver? What do we need to be focusing on? And 90% was, I need a break. And they don't have. We're too transient. We have, you know, the kids don't live here. They live out in California. And so it leaves one brother, one sister, or one child responsible for the elderly parents. And it is stressful. Don't know what the answer is. Glad to see that there's an interest. But just like here in Fort Wayne, it's even as simple as walking. I can't drive anymore, don't have a car, but there's no sidewalks. There's no crosswalks. And we just had a complete streets, we were the head of the coalition that had a complete streets resolution passed just a couple months ago here in Fort Wayne, and a lot of people aren't even aware of that. And that is to look at all new construction and any repairs to make sure that there's places built into those improvements that there are crosswalks with a resting place in the center. Somebody with a walker or a wheelchair may not make it clear across, but I live in the corner of or in an association, Stellhorn and Maplecrest. 15 places to eat. You've got a post office, you've got a cinema, you've got Target, you've got a Walgreens. Can't get across 4 lanes of traffic. We started this project 5 years ago, and we just got the resolution passed. Now what we'd like to see in Fort Wayne, and this is something on the local level, is an oversight committee. They used to have a senior advisory council, I guess, here in Fort Wayne, and it's not there anymore. I'd love to see it come back, that people can sit on that and bring these type of things to the city, and also make sure that the resolutions, you know, we'd rather it be an ordinance, because an ordinance can't be, you know, put aside if the budget doesn't quite, you know, match up what needs to be done. Where an ordinance has got a little bit stronger teeth. So right now we're trying to get some kind of oversight committee here in Fort Wayne to make sure that that ordinance or that resolution is obeyed or, you know, looked at and implemented.
Okay, I have a question for, I believe there's 2 of you on the panel that talked about the geriatric program or certification. I'm an RN that primarily worked ER. Recently, in the last year and a half, retired to care for a Alzheimer patient, family member. And yes, there's desperate need for support, a family trying to do this on their own. And there's a desperate need for knowledge of how you approach different issues with them, even in the different nursing homes and facilities, because I've had to move my brother a couple of times. So I'm wondering if somebody on the panel could address what the geriatric program is, who it's aimed at, and what it covers. And is there any initiatives or any education in the community to caregivers in nursing homes, assisted living, memory care facilities? Because to me, what I'm witnessing is not really special, specific care, just barely adequate.
Well, Abe
Sorry,
is,
I know that was a lot.
Abe is one of the directors of,
Yeah, so I
Gerontology.
have to start with the caveat that I hope you'll report back to Lisa Vartanian, who's the other co-director. There's the gerontology program. I do a lot in healthcare, which is closer to geriatrics, but she's the co-director of gerontology, so the focus is on aging written very broadly. She would not want it to be very healthcare specific in the terms of what the program focuses on. That said, there is a fair amount of the program that can be healthcare specific. It's basically meant, the program is organized around the idea of getting people thinking about, familiar with. I mean, basically it's like taking this panel and turning it into 6 courses that are aimed to help people start thinking about and prepare to work with or interact with or deal with themselves the aging process. And we would start that aging process right after puberty as well, right? So the gerontology program, right, is really, it tends to have a focus for later in life, but ultimately when we're talking about aging, right, we're starting much earlier. So that tells you a little bit about the gerontology program itself, which is aimed at basically any student, so that there's no particular kind of major they have to have or anything like that. Now that said, I'm not sure if the nursing program does anything more specific with geriatrics at all, or I know there's at least a course, but I don't know if there's anything beyond that.
yeah, with the certification, I think you can go out into nursing homes and be a little bit more educated about the aging process and talk to people a little bit better, I guess, when you do go out there. There's the music therapy program that's part of that gerontology certificate. And there are different departments that are active in that. Again, my biology of aging is part of that program. I've gone out and talked to nursing personnel, the people who work in nursing homes, a couple times, but I'd be happy to do it more often than I've done too. I don't know that we're advertising that into nursing home areas. The one thing that the gerontology committee tried to do at one time, and we haven't brought this up recently, is to allow the elderly in Fort Wayne to come back to college at a very much reduced tuition. I'd love to have older people sit in on my courses. They would have so much to offer. For kids, and Beth said this, I asked the students, what are sure signs of aging? And they went through wrinkles and gray hair and flannel shirts and the dialect, the words that you use. You know, it was amazing, some of the things that they came up with, but I would love to have more of the elderly population come to classes at a very much reduced rate, and it wouldn't hurt us at all to do that, and yet when we were trying to promote that, the administration was very much against it at the time. Now with the new administration, maybe there's going to be a change.
I mean, there's lots of possibilities that are there now.
But I'd love to have people come back in and, pardon?
Ivy Tech does do that.
Oh,
Well, we need to compete better with Ivy Tech then.
that's really good. I'm glad to know that, actually.
Yeah, and actually to follow up a little bit on what Elliot said, that one of the courses in the program is a practicum, which is supposed to be towards the end of the program, and it's when the student then reflects on what they've learned in light of their experiences, typically in a setting that might be a nursing home or some other facility for aging. So.
And you may not know this, but if you have a 529 plan, you can actually use it for your own educational things as you grow older. And you can attend classes here, and you can use your 529 plan instead of using it for the grandkids as you get older.
Yeah, so you can deduct up to $5,000 a year.
But I think you've really brought up a good point, because typically what we see are patients are in some type of a healthcare crisis. They end up being discharged. Family gets maybe, 15, 20 minutes of teaching. And it's hard. It's tough to go home because the what ifs, you don't know what to ask. You don't know what you don't know to even ask. And so I think that these are great ideas, that we can improve on and maintain that continuum of care a little better than what we're doing.
And there's one more question, and while we're getting to that, I did want to point out that one of the things that I'm involved with Keith is he mentioned the Northeast Indiana Coalition for Advanced Care Planning, and we've been doing events. We probably hit dozens of events at this point over the last several years, in which we're trying to do exactly the kinds of things that you're looking for, in which we're just trying to push the culture a little bit by constantly having events in which we start to talk about aging and we start to talk about advanced care planning as a routine part of life, because people, you're always just older is always just a little bit older, right? And you got to start now, right? And I always tell my students, they're young, many of them are young, and I tell them you got to start thinking about it now and not waiting until later, and that needs to become a more routine part in order for those conversations to happen at an earlier stage.
If I might just add, the Gunderson Healthcare System in La Crosse, Wisconsin, has put together this incredible program. It's a 3-step program. You turn 50, you go to the doctor, the lawyer, the banker. Do you have an advance directive? You turn 70, do you have an advance directive? Have you had the conversation? Is it in your medical record? You turn 90, let's make sure you have a post form or a pulse form to make sure we know what you want for end-of-life care. And they did a PBS show up there. And 98% of the people that die up there have an advance directive in their medical record. They save about $20,000 per year per person under the Medicare system, because you're less likely to be hospitalized or have things done to you. And my favorite part is they show these 2 little old ladies sitting on the porch, and they're talking and say, so-and-so down the street doesn't have an advance directive. How cool is that? Lori, you wanted to say something?
I did. I just wanted to offer that I'm the care consultant in the Alzheimer's Association office in Fort Wayne, and we offer exactly what you are asking for. We provide educational programming to groups all over the 9 Northeast counties that are very specific. They can be very general to what are the signs of dementia, to I'm a late stage caregiver and what does that look like and what do I need to know, and everything in between. And we do that for free. We also, as the care consultant, I meet with families and caregivers every day, and I sit down with them and I do a lot of disease education, and I also help them plan. I help them kind of figure out what their needs are, what their particular needs are, what means something to them, and then we put together a care plan that's particular for them. And then our website, the alz.org, has a very robust training program, for lack of a better way to say it, in all areas of dementia, Alzheimer's, other forms of dementia, and the care and support that folks need. And it's not very expensive, it's pretty inexpensive, and also all of our educational programs are online for free. You just have to go on and sign up with a username and a password. It's as easy as that. But you can just call the association and meet with a care consultant anytime.
And Laura, you probably have a card to give to her?
I do.
So it's about 8:35, so we're a little bit over what we typically do. If there's anybody with one last pressing question, we could certainly take that, or do I see one? You do? Go, please.
One thing that's only been touched on that really concerns me is we've been working for years to keep people at home and out of nursing homes, if that is their choice. Is the staff, obtaining the staff for home care, for home health care, for nursing facilities, adequate staffing in nursing facilities. They're not well-paid jobs. They're very demanding. There's a lot of turnover, a lot of out in the community. They're part-time jobs without benefits. This really worries me with our aging population. So
Well, I know that Nyla and I've both lived that, being former directors of nursing at, skilled assisted life care communities. And the challenges about finding individuals that want to do the work is so different than finding the individuals that want a job. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just prolifically different. There aren't necessarily a lot of people that are dedicated and committed to providing quality, compassionate, holistic care, to our cherished residents. And I didn't find the solution and the answer to that. And, and I did work in major metropolitan area, Columbus, Ohio, rural, different parts, rural Ohio. And it was always a challenge. And at least by design, nursing is generally the group that's responsible for hiring, the nurses, and the aides. And you're right. How do we attract individuals if we're only paying $6, $7,
it's not a very desirable job.
$9 an hour? And I could be pretty frank with you all, but I won't be. But there's a lot of language that people use.
It's tape
with
recorded. It
regard-
won't be showed till later.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
With regard to what people perceive their job is as an aide. I started out in work as a candy striper and as an aide. But it's different, and it's very challenging to find the right fit. And it can be hard to convince administration that, we have to say no to this person, and this is why, when administration is coming down on us and saying, you've got to hire, you've got to get this filled, because we are not going to pay for an agency person, I mean, that's always, it's extremely hard.
I think with nursing education, we look at ways to get nurses educated about long-term care. I think, unfortunately, it does get dropped many times in programs. Like I said, I never even worked in a nursing home until I was a nurse for many years. So it's getting that education out. When I worked with nursing home nurses after coming from acute care into long-term care, it was interesting to me that nursing home nurses had really poor self-images of themselves. They would say, I'm just a nursing home nurse. I do this because I can't do anything else. And it was very common to hear those kinds of comments. So I think that as care of elderly persons change, and we look at new ways of caring for them, and we get nurses excited about care, it's a specialty. It's just as much a specialty as any acute care area. It is very rewarding. Every area is rewarding in its own special way. And so that's what we have to get out there, and we have to get the education out there.
Yeah, we have to change that perception.
All right, so you've got your task. I'd like to thank the panel for their time and expertise.